The little boy couldn't have been more than 5 years old, standing in the middle of Central Park's crowded pathway. Tears were streaming down his face as hundreds of people walked past without stopping. His expensive clothes, a tiny designer suit that probably cost more than my rent, marked him as someone from money. But that didn't stop the crowd from ignoring his distress. It was New York at its finest. See something, ignore something, and just keep walking. But I've never been good at minding my own business. I knelt beside him, keeping my voice gentle, and asked if he was lost. He looked at me with dark, terrified eyes and said something I didn't understand. It wasn't English. I tried Spanish, since I'd learned enough working at the cafe to manage a basic conversation. But he just cried harder. Then I heard it. A word that sounded like mama. Italian. The child was speaking Italian. I'd spent a semester abroad in Florence during college and had fallen in love with the language, the art, the culture. I'd continued studying after returning, taking evening classes while working and maintaining my fluency because it connected me to the happiest time of my life. Now, that random skill was about to save a terrified child. I spoke softly in Italian, telling him not to cry. I said I was there to help and asked for his name. His eyes widened with recognition and relief. He told me his name was Luca, and his words tumbled out in rapid Italian. He was looking for his papa. They'd been walking, he'd seen a dog and chased it, and now he couldn't find anyone. I told him it was okay, that we would find his father. I took his small hand and told him to stay with me. He nodded, gripping my hand like a lifeline, his tears finally slowing. I looked around the crowded park, trying to figure out the best approach. Security, police, lost and found. Then I noticed them. 3 large men in dark suits, moving through the crowd with military precision, clearly searching for something or someone. I asked Luca if these men were with his father. He looked and nodded vigorously. He started waving his free hand, calling out for Marco. One of the men spotted us, and his entire demeanor changed. Relief washed over his face as he spoke rapidly into a phone or earpiece. The other 2 immediately converged on our location. They surrounded us within seconds, and I instinctively pulled Luca closer. My protective instincts were overriding logic. These were clearly security, probably legitimate, but something about their intensity made me nervous. The first man, Marco apparently, knelt down. His hands gently checked the boy for injuries while he spoke rapid Italian. Then his eyes found mine, sharp and assessing. His English was accented but clear. He thanked me for finding him. I just told him the boy was lost and scared, and I just stayed with him until... A voice cut through the crowd like a blade, commanding and cold. It asked in Italian who this woman was. I turned toward the voice and felt my breath catch. The man walking toward us was devastating in a way that went beyond simple handsomeness. He was tall and powerfully built, moving through the crowd like it parted for him, which it did. He had dark hair swept back from a face of sharp angles and aristocratic features. He had olive skin, full lips, and eyes that were almost black, and they were fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. He wore a dark suit that probably cost more than my car, with an expensive watch visible at his wrist. He had an aura of danger that was impossible to ignore. This was someone important, someone powerful, someone you didn't cross. And he was looking at me like I was either a threat or prey. Luca released my hand and ran to him, calling him Papa. I watched the man's entire demeanor shift. He scooped up his son with surprising gentleness, his face transforming from cold assessment to warm relief. He murmured that Luca had scared him to death and told him never to run away again. They had a rapid conversation in Italian that I could mostly follow. Luca explained about the dog, and the man gently scolded him, but he was clearly just relieved his son was safe. Then the man's eyes found mine again, over Luca's head. He asked if I spoke Italian. I kept my answer simple, suddenly nervous under his scrutiny. I just said yes. I studied in Florence. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. He set Luca down, keeping one hand on his son's shoulder, and took a step closer to me. He said he was very grateful that I found his son. He extended his other hand and introduced himself as Alessandro Russo. I shook it, feeling the strength in his grip. The calluses that suggested his hands did more than sign business documents. I told him my name was Sophia Blake, and that I was just glad the boy was safe. He noted that Blake wasn't an Italian name, and his eyes traced my features. He said I spoke well and asked where I learned. I told him it was Florence, like I said, through a study abroad program and then evening classes in New York. I told him I loved the language. Why was I nervous? He was just a father, grateful I'd helped his lost son. Except he wasn't just anything. The way his security surrounded us, the way people in the crowd gave him space, the expensive everything about him. This was someone significant. Alessandro turned to Luca and, switching back to Italian, told him to say thank you to the kind lady who found him. Luca said thank you, then surprised me by hugging my legs. He told me I was very kind. I smiled, ruffling his dark curls, and told him he was welcome. When I looked up, Alessandro was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It was intense and focused, like he was memorizing every detail of my face. I excused myself, suddenly uncomfortable with his attention. I said I should get back to work, that I was on my lunch break. He asked where I worked. I told him it was a cafe near Columbus Circle, and started to back away. I said I was really glad Luca was okay and said goodbye. He told me to wait, but I was already moving, disappearing into the crowd. My heart was racing for reasons I didn't want to examine. Something about Alessandro Russo had set off every warning bell in my head, despite the Grateful Father act. I made it back to the cafe with 5 minutes to spare. I tied on my apron and jumped back into the afternoon rush. But I couldn't shake the feeling of those dark eyes watching me, assessing me, cataloging every detail. My coworker Rachel nudged me and asked if I was okay. She said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I just told her it was a weird lunch break, that I'd helped a lost kid in the park. She said that was sweet, and very me. She handed me an order ticket for table 6, who wanted a cappuccino with the fancy leaf foam art I do. I dove back into work, losing myself in the familiar rhythm of espresso machines and customer orders. By the time my shift ended at 6, I'd almost forgotten about the intense man and his adorable son. Almost. I was walking to the subway when I noticed the car. It was a black, expensive SUV with tinted windows, parked across the street from the cafe. It was probably nothing. New York was full of expensive cars, except it followed me to the subway station. And when I emerged at my stop in Queens, another black SUV was waiting. I told myself it was paranoia, just a coincidence. But when I reached my apartment building and saw a third SUV parked outside, I knew it wasn't. I pulled out my phone, ready to call 911, when a man stepped out of the vehicle. He wasn't threatening, he wasn't approaching, he was just standing there, waiting. He looked at me, nodded once, then got back in the car. It was a message. We know where you live. I ran inside, locked my apartment door, and immediately called Rachel. I told her someone was following me, in black SUVs. They were outside the cafe and now they were at my apartment. Rachel told me to slow down and asked why anyone would follow me. I said I didn't know, but maybe it was because of that kid I helped. His father seemed intense. She asked what kind of intense, like a celebrity, or like he was dangerous. I told her it was the kind of person who has security, and everyone gives them space. I peeked through my curtain. The SUV was still there. I asked Rachel, what if he's like, with the mob or something? She said this was New York, not The Godfather, and that I was probably just freaked out because a rich guy was grateful, but she sounded uncertain. She offered to come over with wine so we could laugh about my paranoia. I told her that would actually be great. While waiting for Rachel, I did what any modern woman would do. I Googled Alessandro Russo, New York. The results made my blood run cold. Alessandro Russo wasn't just rich. He was the head of one of New York's most powerful crime families. The articles were carefully worded, mentioning alleged ties to organized crime and suspected involvement in racketeering. But the message was clear. I'd helped the son of a mob boss, and now they were watching me. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It said not to be afraid, that the protection was for my safety. It was signed AR. How did he have my number? I'd never given it to him. Another text came through. It said I had a gift with his son, that he hadn't responded to anyone like that since his mother died. He said he'd like to speak with me tomorrow at 10 a.m., and sent an address in Manhattan. It was probably his office, or wherever mob bosses conducted business. I should have ignored it. I should have blocked the number, filed a police report, done anything except respond to a criminal who was clearly having me followed. But then I thought of Luca's tears, his relief when I'd spoken to him in Italian. I thought of the way he'd hugged me goodbye. And I thought of Alessandro's expression when he'd looked at his son. It wasn't cold or dangerous, but loving and grateful. This is insane, I muttered, typing a response. I told him I would come, but only to talk. His reply was immediate. That's all I ask. He said the car would pick me up at 9:30. I replied that I could take the subway. His response was firm. The car will pick you up at 9:30. Non-negotiable. I stared at my phone, realizing I'd just agreed to meet with a mob boss. Rachel was going to kill me, or Alessandro Russo would. It was hard to say which was more likely. Rachel arrived with wine and immediately noticed my panic. She told me to spill, to tell her what was really going on. I showed her my phone, the texts, the Google results, the Wikipedia page that carefully detailed Alessandro Russo's alleged criminal empire. She breathed out, "Holy crap." She said I helped a mob boss's kid, and that this was serious. Like, witness protection level serious. "I know," I said, "but what was I supposed to do? Let a 5-year-old cry in the middle of Central Park?" She said yes. That's exactly what normal people do in New York. She poured us both generous glasses of wine. "Okay," she said. "Think. What exactly did you say to him?" "Just that I found his son and helped calm him down. We spoke Italian." She gulped her wine. "Of course you spoke Italian with a mob boss. Because you can't just help someone like a normal person. You have to showcase rare skills that make you interesting." I argued it's not a rare skill, that lots of people speak Italian. She countered, "Not in New York. Not fluently. Not enough to comfort a terrified kid." She paced my small living room. "Okay, so he's intrigued by you. Maybe he just wants to thank you properly. Rich people do that, right? Give reward money or whatever." I reminded her he was having me followed, that he somehow got my phone number, and that he was sending a car tomorrow. I showed her the messages. "This isn't normal, grateful parent behavior." She agreed. "No, it's mob behavior, which means you absolutely should not get in that car tomorrow." She grabbed my phone and said we were blocking the number, that I was calling in sick to work and staying here with all the locks engaged until this blows over. And if it doesn't blow over, if they keep following me, then we go to the police. And tell them what? That I helped a child, and now his father wants to thank me? They'll laugh me out of the station. I took my phone back. "Look, maybe I should just go and hear what he wants. It's a public meeting, 10 a.m. in Manhattan. What's he going to do in broad daylight?" She replied that he's the mob. He can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. But her protest sounded weak, even to her own ears. "Okay," she said. "Compromise. You go, but I'm tracking your phone. You text me every 30 minutes, and if I don't hear from you by noon, I'm calling everyone. The police, the FBI, your mom in Oregon, everyone. Deal." That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump, convinced someone was breaking in. The SUV stayed parked outside all night. I checked every hour, and knowing they were there was somehow both terrifying and oddly reassuring. At 9 a.m., I dressed carefully. Professional but not too formal. Black pants, a nice blouse, my good jacket. If this was a business meeting, I'd dress for it. If it was something else, well, at least I'd look put together when my body was found. Rachel told me that wasn't funny when I made the joke. I told her gallows humor is how I cope. At exactly 9:30, my phone buzzed. "The car is downstairs." I hugged Rachel, checked that my phone was fully charged, and headed down. The black SUV was there, rear door open, a driver in a suit waiting beside it. He asked me to please make myself comfortable. The interior was more luxurious than my entire apartment. Leather seats, climate control, even a minibar. I sat stiffly, trying not to touch anything as we pulled into Manhattan traffic. The drive took 40 minutes, ending at a building in Midtown that looked like any other office tower. The driver led me through a private entrance to an elevator that required a key card. We rode to the top floor in silence. The doors opened to what could only be described as a penthouse office. There were floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, the same park where I'd found Luca yesterday. Expensive art was on the walls, and the furniture probably cost more than my college tuition. And sitting behind a massive desk was Alessandro Russo. He stood when I entered, buttoning his suit jacket. It was a dark navy that made his eyes look even darker. He thanked me for coming. The words came out before I could stop them. Did I have a choice? A slight smile touched his lips. He said, "You always have a choice. You could have ignored my messages, refused to come, called the police. But you're here. That tells me something. That I'm an idiot who makes poor life choices? No," he said, "that you're brave and curious." He gestured to a sitting area away from the desk, a leather sofa and chairs arranged around a coffee table. He asked me to sit, and offered coffee or tea. I said I'd like answers. But I sat, perching on the edge of the sofa. I asked him why I was here and what he wanted. He poured himself an espresso from a silver service, his movements controlled and precise. He explained that Luca hasn't spoken to anyone outside the family since his mother died 2 years ago. He's had tutors, nannies, therapists, all carefully vetted, all Italian speakers, and he barely says a word to any of them. I told him I was sorry for his loss, but I still didn't understand. He continued, saying that yesterday, with me, Luca talked, an actual conversation. Not one-word answers. He laughed when I called him little one. He hugged me goodbye. Alessandro set down his cup, and asked if I knew how long it's been since his son voluntarily hugged someone outside their immediate family. He asked me to call him Alessandro. The name felt strange on my tongue. I said I was glad I could help Luca feel comfortable, but that didn't explain why I was being followed or why I was in his office. He explained that the surveillance is for protection, not intimidation. He said I helped the son of someone important, and that makes me valuable to certain people. Good people who might want to reward me, and bad people who might want to use me against him. His expression was serious. The moment Luca spoke to me in that park, I became a person of interest. He said he was making sure the right people found me first. And the right people? I asked. Was him? Yes, he said. And what do you want from me? He leaned back in his chair, studying me with those intense dark eyes. He wanted to offer me a job as Luca's tutor. Language instruction, cultural education, general companionship. I'd work at his home, 4 afternoons per week. It would be well compensated, all above board, all legal, all safe. I laughed. An actual laugh. You want me to work for you? For the mob? He said he wanted me to teach his son, and the fact that he had certain business interests was irrelevant to my role. He pulled out a contract, sliding it across the table. $25,000 per month. Health insurance included. Completely legitimate employment. All taxes paid, all documentation proper. $25,000 a month. That was more than I made in a year at the cafe. This is insane, I said. I'm not qualified to be a tutor. I have a degree in art history, not education. He said I speak fluent Italian, that I connected with his son in minutes, and that I have a calm, gentle demeanor that he responds to. Those, he said, were the only qualifications he needed. He pushed the contract closer. He told me to read it, to take it to a lawyer if I wanted. There was nothing nefarious hidden in the fine print. It was a straightforward employment agreement. I stared at the contract, my mind racing. This was dangerous. Getting involved with someone like Alessandro Russo, even in a legitimate capacity, was asking for trouble. But $25,000 a month would pay off my student loans. It would let me quit the cafe, focus on my art, maybe even save for graduate school. It would change my life completely. I told him I needed time to think about it. He said of course, and told me to take the contract and review it. He stood, and I automatically stood with him. But he wanted me to understand something. Whether I accepted the job or not, I was now on his radar. And that meant I was under his protection. The surveillance would continue, regardless of my employment status, because he wouldn't risk someone using me to get to Luca. So I'm a prisoner either way, just with better pay if I work for you? He said I wasn't a prisoner. I was protected. There's a difference. He walked me to the elevator and told me Marco would drive me home. He said to take the weekend to consider his offer, and if I accepted, I could start Monday. In the elevator, I finally let myself breathe. The whole meeting had felt surreal. Sitting in a mob boss's penthouse office, being offered an insane amount of money to tutor his son, and being told I was protected whether I liked it or not. Rachel was waiting at my apartment, practically tackling me when I walked in. She was so relieved, saying she was 10 minutes from calling the FBI, and asked what happened. I told her everything, showing her the contract and explaining the offer. She said that's actually not as horrifying as she expected. I mean, it's a real job, a legitimate job, just with a very illegitimate boss. She read through the contract. Holy crap, Sophie, this is life-changing money. I know, I said. But can I really work for someone like him, knowing what he is? She corrected me, knowing what he allegedly is. He's never been convicted of anything. She kept reading. And honestly, teaching a traumatized kid Italian and keeping him company, that's not exactly helping with criminal activity. That's just being a nice person who gets paid really well. I asked if she thought I should do it. She said I should decide what I can live with. But she pointed out that I was working 2 jobs to pay rent in Queens. I'm 26 and still paying off student loans. I have an art degree I can't use because galleries don't pay enough for me to survive in this city. She set down the contract. This could change everything for you. The question is, can you handle the moral ambiguity of who signs your paychecks? I spent the weekend researching Alessandro Russo more thoroughly. The articles painted him as a ghost. Someone everyone knew ran a criminal empire, but who'd never been successfully prosecuted. He was smart, careful, and protected by lawyers and family loyalty. But there were also articles about his philanthropy, donations to children's hospitals, funding for Italian cultural programs, support for immigrant communities. Either he was laundering money through charity, or he genuinely cared about certain causes. Or both. People were rarely all good or all bad. Monday morning, I called the number Alessandro had given me. I said I'll take the job, but I have conditions. He said he was listening. I told him I teach Luca. Only Luca. I don't get involved in his business. I don't see anything I shouldn't see, and I don't know anything I shouldn't know. I'm a tutor. Nothing more. He agreed. And, I added, if at any point I feel unsafe or compromised, I can quit. No strings, no retaliation, no making my life difficult. There was a pause. He said that was a harder promise to make. Not because he'd retaliate, but because once I was part of his household, I was under his protection permanently. That doesn't end just because I stop working for him. So I'm stuck with your protection forever? I asked. He said I was stuck with his family's interest in my well-being forever, and asked if that was such a terrible thing. I thought about the SUV that had sat outside my apartment all weekend. I thought about feeling safer knowing someone was watching, and how that protection had let me sleep better than I had in months. I asked when I would start. He said today. If I was available, Luca was excited to see me again. He'd been asking about the kind lady from the park. Despite everything, I smiled. I said I could be there at 2 p.m. He said perfect, that Marco would pick me up at 1:30. And then he thanked me. He said I was giving his son something he thought he'd lost forever. When I asked what that was, he said joy. I was giving him joy. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at the contract I was about to sign. I wondered if I was making the best decision of my life, or the worst. Probably both. But for $25,000 a month, and the chance to help a sweet kid named Luca, I was willing to find out. Alessandro's home wasn't what I expected. Instead of some gaudy mansion screaming mob money, it was an elegant townhouse on the Upper East Side. It was understated wealth, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. It had a beautiful brownstone facade and flower boxes on the windows. It was the type of place that cost tens of millions but looked tastefully normal from the outside. Marco walked me to the door, where a woman in her 60s greeted us with a warm smile. She introduced herself as Teresa, the housekeeper, and said Mr. Russo had told her to expect me. The interior matched the exterior. It was elegant but comfortable, with family photos on the walls instead of just expensive art. I spotted Luca in many of them, and a beautiful dark-haired woman who must have been his mother. Teresa softly said, "That was Gianna, Mrs. Russo. She told me she died 2 years ago from cancer. It was very sudden and aggressive. She went from diagnosis to gone in 4 months. She crossed herself. She said Mr. Russo has never recovered, and poor Luca stopped talking to everyone except family. I told her I was sorry, that I couldn't imagine how hard that must be. She said I was the first outsider he's spoken to since, and that Mr. Russo was very grateful. She led me through the house to a bright sunroom at the back, and announced that Luca's teacher was here. The little boy looked up from the blocks he was playing with, and his face lit up with genuine joy. He was so happy I came back. I knelt beside him, smiling, and reminded him that he told me he'd build a castle. He showed me his impressive block construction. It was definitely castle-like, with towers and everything. We fell into easy conversation in Italian, discussing architecture and dragons and all the important things 5-year-olds care about. I was so focused on Luca that I didn't notice Alessandro standing in the doorway until Teresa cleared her throat. He said he didn't want to interrupt. They were having such a nice conversation. He moved into the room, and Luca immediately reached for him, telling him that Sofia was here and they were talking about dragons. Alessandro said he could see. His entire demeanor was different around his son. It was softer, warmer, the dangerous edge completely gone. He told Luca that I would be here every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday afternoon, and asked if he would like that. Luca launched into an excited monologue in Italian about all the things we could do together. I watched Alessandro's face transform. He looked at his son like he was witnessing a miracle. When Luca finally paused for breath, Alessandro caught my eye and silently mouthed the words, "Thank you." The afternoon passed quickly. I worked with Luca on his Italian vocabulary, read him stories, and helped him with a puzzle. He was bright, sweet, and starved for attention and connection. By the time my session ended at 5, I was exhausted, but happy. Teresa said I was a natural while bringing me tea in Alessandro's study, where I was documenting the day's activities for his review. She'd never seen Luca so animated. She told me whatever I was doing, to keep doing it. I said I was just talking to him, treating him like a person instead of a broken thing that needs fixing. She patted my shoulder and said that was more than anyone else has done, and Mr. Russo would be pleased. As if summoned, Alessandro appeared, having apparently just arrived home. His suit was slightly rumpled, his tie loosened, and there was a tension around his eyes that suggested his day had been long and stressful. He asked how the first session was. I handed him my notes, which had detailed observations about Luca's language skills, his interests, and areas where he needed more support. Alessandro read them carefully, his expression thoughtful. He said this was excellent, very thorough. He looked up at me and asked if I'd like to stay for dinner. Luca had been asking, and Teresa always makes too much food. I said I should get home. He pleaded, saying it would mean a lot to Luca, and to him. His dark eyes held mine. Just dinner, as thanks for today. I should have said no. I should have maintained professional boundaries. But the hopeful expression on his face, so different from the cold mob boss I'd met in his office, made me agree. Okay, just dinner. Dinner was surprisingly normal. We ate in the kitchen rather than a formal dining room. We had pasta that Teresa had made from scratch, fresh bread, and a simple salad. Luca sat between us, chattering away in Italian about his day, occasionally translating for Teresa when she asked what we were discussing. Alessandro said quietly to me that Luca was never like this, so happy, so talkative. He said I'd worked a miracle in one afternoon. I told him it wasn't a miracle. He just needed someone who speaks his mother's language, who makes him feel connected to her. I watched Luca animatedly describing his block construction. Alessandro told me she was Italian, from Milan. They met when he was there on business and were married within 6 months. He paused, emotion flickering across his face. He said she was everything good about him, everything light and warm and kind. When she died, he lost the best part of himself, and Luca lost his whole world. I told him I was sorry, that it must have been devastating. It was, he said. And watching Luca withdraw, stop talking, stop connecting with anyone, that was almost worse. It was like he was losing him too. He looked at me directly. Until yesterday in the park, when I watched him talk to you like you were the answer to prayers I didn't know how to pray. The intensity of his gaze made me uncomfortable. I said I was just a tutor, that I wasn't replacing his mother. He said he knew that, and he wasn't asking me to. He was just grateful, more than he could express. He stood, clearly uncomfortable with his own vulnerability, and said Marco would drive me home. He said he'd see me Thursday. Yes, Thursday. Over the next 2 weeks, I fell into a routine. 4 afternoons per week at the Russo townhouse, working with Luca, and occasionally staying for dinner when he begged me to. The job was perfect. It was engaging, rewarding, and paid so well I'd quit the cafe after the first week. But I was also becoming increasingly aware of Alessandro, the way he'd watch me and Luca together, with an expression that was part gratitude, part longing, the way he'd join us for tea sometimes, listening to our Italian conversations with a small smile, the way he'd ask about my life, my art, my dreams, with genuine interest. Rachel observed over drinks one Friday night that I was falling for him. She told me not to even try to deny it, that I get this look when I talk about him. I said I wasn't falling for him. He's my boss, and a criminal. She corrected me, an alleged criminal who's really hot and clearly into you. She sipped her martini and asked if he'd made a move. No, of course not, I said. It's completely professional. But you want him to, she teased. Did I? I thought about Alessandro's rare smiles, the way his whole face changed when he laughed, and how gentle he was with Luca. I thought about the intelligence in his eyes, the way we could discuss Italian art and literature for hours, how he'd ordered books he thought I'd like for the townhouse library. It doesn't matter what I want, I told her. Nothing can happen between us. Why not? You're both single adults. I reminded her he's the mob. Even if he's a good father and kind to me, he's still someone who does terrible things. I can't ignore that. Can't you? She asked. You're already working for him. She had a point. I'd already compromised my morals by taking his money. What was the difference between working for him and being involved with him? Everything, I told myself, but I was starting to wonder if I believed it. The shift happened on a Tuesday afternoon in my 3rd week. I'd just finished with Luca and was gathering my things when Alessandro appeared. He asked if I had a moment, that he'd like to show me something. He led me upstairs to a room I'd never been in. It was a studio with perfect north-facing light, empty except for an easel and some storage cabinets. He told me this was Gianna's painting studio and he hadn't touched it since she died. He opened the cabinets, revealing high-end art supplies. Oil paints, brushes, canvases, everything an artist could want. He said she wanted it to be used. He asked if I would like to paint here in my free time, or before my sessions with Luca. He knew I studied art, and Teresa had mentioned I'd given up my own painting because I couldn't afford supplies. I stared at the beautiful space, the expensive materials, the generous offer. I told him it was too much. He said it was nothing, that these supplies would just sit here unused, and that Gianna would have wanted another artist to have them. He moved to the window. He said he wasn't trying to buy my affection or compromise my professionalism. He just wanted me to have something for myself. He said I give so much to Luca, and he wanted to give something to me. The question came out in a whisper. Why? Why are you being so kind to me? He turned, and the expression on his face took my breath away. Because you brought light back into this house. Because watching you with my son makes me remember what happiness feels like. Because when you laugh, I want to find ways to make you laugh again. He took a step closer. Because I'm falling for you, Sophia. And I'm trying very hard to fight it, but I'm losing that battle. My heart hammered against my ribs. I said we can't, that this is wrong. He said it was complicated, and probably a terrible idea. He was close enough now that I could feel the heat of him. But that doesn't make it less true. I'm falling for you. And if I'm not mistaken, you feel something too. I admitted that even if I did, it doesn't matter. He's my boss. He's a criminal. He told me I could say it. His smile was sad. He knew what he was. He said he wasn't a good man, that he does things that would horrify me if I knew the details. But with me, with Luca, in this house, he gets to pretend he's better than he is, that he deserves something good. He told me I didn't have to say anything, or feel anything. He stepped back, putting distance between us. He just needed me to know, to understand why he can't stop thinking about me. Why every Tuesday and Thursday and Friday he watches the clock until I arrive. Why teaching his son Italian has become the highlight of his week. Not because of Luca's progress, but because it means I'm here. I should have left. I should have maintained boundaries and reminded him this was inappropriate. Instead, I said that I think about him too. That when I'm not here, I'm counting the hours until I come back. Not just for Luca, but for him. The admission hung between us, dangerous and electric. Alessandro breathed out an Italian curse word. We shouldn't do this, he said. No, we shouldn't. It would complicate everything. Absolutely. You should leave before I do something we'll both regret. I said I should, but neither of us moved. We stood in Gianna's sunlit studio, surrounded by her abandoned art, and I felt the inevitability of what was about to happen. Alessandro moved closer again and softly said to tell him to stop. Tell me this is wrong and I'll walk away. I'll be professional, respectful, nothing but your employer. But if you don't say anything, I didn't say anything. He kissed me like he'd been starving for it. It was gentle at first, almost reverent, then deeper as I responded. His hands cupped my face, his thumbs brushing my cheekbones, and I felt myself melting into him. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. He murmured that this changes everything. I know. He said we should talk about boundaries, about what this means. I said we'll talk tomorrow. He kissed me again, softer this time. For tonight, can we just be two people who want each other? Not boss and employee, not criminal and civilian. Just Alessandro and Sophia. He agreed. Just Alessandro and Sophia. I liked the sound of that. We didn't talk the next day, or the day after that. Instead, we fell into something that felt like a beautiful secret. Stolen moments between my sessions with Luca, lingering conversations over dinner, the weight of unspoken feelings growing heavier with each passing day. By Thursday, the tension was unbearable. I finished my session with Luca, who'd made incredible progress with his Italian reading comprehension, and found Alessandro waiting in the hallway. He asked if we could talk privately. His expression was serious and controlled, giving nothing away. He led me to his study, closing the door behind us. The moment it clicked shut, he pulled me into his arms, kissing me with an intensity that made my knees weak. He murmured against my lips that he'd been going insane, watching me with Luca and knowing he couldn't touch me. He kissed me again. We need to figure this out, he said. What we're doing, what we are to each other. I know. I pulled back enough to see his face. I told him I can't be his secret. I can't sneak around hiding what this is. That's not who I am. He said he wasn't asking me to hide, but we needed to be careful. His world is dangerous, and being close to him makes me a target. He needed to ensure my safety before we become official. I asked what he meant by official. He said he wanted to date me properly. Take me to dinner, to galleries, to all the places I've mentioned wanting to see. He wanted people to know I was his, that we were together. But first, he needed to increase my security and make certain arrangements. I asked what kind of arrangements. The kind that ensure no one uses me to get to him. The kind that make it clear that hurting me means war with his family. His expression grew cold and dangerous. He said he had enemies, bad people who would love to find a weakness they could exploit. I couldn't be that weakness, unless he could protect me properly. So I need to become part of your world, I said. Really part of it. Yes, he replied. And I need to know you understand what that means. He guided me to sit on the leather sofa, settling beside me. He said if we do this, if we make this real, there's no going back to my normal life. I'll have security, always. People will know who I am and what I mean to him. I'll be associated with his name, his reputation, his business, his criminal business, I added. Yes, he said. He didn't try to deny it. He promised he wouldn't lie to me about what he is or what he does. He runs an organization that operates outside the law. They handle protection, settle disputes, and maintain order in communities the police ignore. Is it legal? No. Is it necessary? He believes it is. But that was for me to decide, if I could accept it. I thought about the past 3 weeks, the way Alessandro spoke about his work, not with pride, but with a sense of duty. The charitable donations, the community support, the fact that people in his neighborhood seemed to respect rather than fear him. I asked him to tell me about Gianna, how she handled his world. His expression softened. He said she hated it at first. They almost broke up because she couldn't reconcile the man she loved with what he did for a living. But eventually, she understood that he wasn't a monster, just someone trying to do what's right in a system that doesn't always allow for legal solutions. And she made peace with that. She found ways to balance it. She focused on the good, the scholarships they funded, the businesses they protected, the families they helped. She ignored the rest. He took my hand. He said he wasn't asking me to approve of everything, just to accept that this is part of who he is, and to decide if I can live with it. Can I ask you something? Honestly? I asked. Anything, he said. Have you ever killed anyone? He didn't flinch. Yes. In self-defense. In defense of his family. In situations where it was them or him. He said he wasn't proud of it, but he wouldn't lie about it either. I should have been horrified. I should have pulled my hand away, walked out, and never looked back. But I thought about the gentle father who read bedtime stories to his son. The man who'd created a scholarship program for Italian-American students. Who'd given me access to his late wife's art studio because he wanted me to have something for myself. People were complicated. Good and bad existed in the same person. Finally, I said I needed time to think about this, about what being with him really means. But I'm not running. I'm just processing. He told me to take all the time I need. He kissed my forehead, but he wanted me to know that he was already in love with me. Completely. Terrifyingly in love. And if I decide I can't handle his world, he'll understand. But he'll never stop protecting me. Even if I walk away, I'm his to keep safe. I told him that was a very possessive statement. He smiled slightly. I'm a very possessive man when it comes to people I love. It's one of my many flaws you'll have to decide if you can tolerate. I spent the weekend soul-searching. Rachel came over Saturday night, and I told her everything. The kiss, the conversation, the impossible choice I was facing. Okay, she said, so let me get this straight. A gorgeous, rich Italian mob boss is in love with you, wants to date you properly, is honest about his criminal activities, and you're hesitating? I told her it was because dating a criminal is insane. Is it though? She asked. You've been working for him for 3 weeks. Has anything bad happened? Have you witnessed any crimes? Been asked to do anything illegal? No, I said. But that doesn't mean anything. Rachel pointed out that in those 3 weeks, I've been happier than she's ever seen me. I light up when I talk about Luca. I get all dreamy when I mention Alessandro. I'm painting again, for God's sake. I haven't painted since college. She grabbed my hands. She said she wasn't saying to ignore the danger, but maybe the danger is worth it for the happiness. I told her she was a terrible influence. She said she was a realistic influence. You're never going to meet a perfect man with a perfect life who makes you feel the way Alessandro does. So the question is, can you accept an imperfect man with a complicated life who makes you deliriously happy? Monday, I arrived at the townhouse with my decision made. Alessandro met me at the door, his expression carefully neutral. I told him I wanted to try. Really try. You and me, officially dating, navigating your world together. I took a breath, but I have conditions. He told me to tell him. First, you're honest with me, always. About the danger, about your business, about everything. No protecting me from the truth. He agreed. Second, Luca comes first, always. If being with me impacts him negatively in any way, we stop. His well-being is more important than our relationship. Absolutely, he said. Third, I maintain some independence. I'll accept security if necessary, but I'm not giving up my entire life. I still want to paint, have friends, and exist as my own person outside of being your girlfriend. Of course, he said. I don't want to cage you, Sophia. I want to be with you. He pulled me close. Anything else? He asked. Yes. You have to teach me about your world. The rules, the players, the dangers. If I'm going to survive being with you, I need to understand what I'm dealing with. He said that was fair, and he promised to educate me thoroughly. He kissed me softly. So, we're doing this? We're together? His smile was brilliant, transforming his face from dangerously handsome to absolutely devastating. Then we should celebrate properly. Dinner tonight, somewhere special, just the two of us. What about Luca? Teresa will watch him. She's been practically begging me to go out, to have a life beyond work and fatherhood. He cupped my face. Let me take you on a real date, Sophia. Let me show you off to the world. That night, Alessandro took me to a restaurant I'd only read about, the kind of place that required reservations months in advance and had a Michelin star. But when we arrived, we were immediately escorted to a private room in the back, past all the people waiting. Alessandro explained it was one of the perks of his name, and not all of them were bad. Dinner was incredible. Multiple courses of exquisite Italian cuisine, and wine that probably cost more than my old monthly rent. Our conversation flowed from art to politics to philosophy. Alessandro was educated, well-read, and passionate about culture and history. Over dessert, he said this was the part people don't see. They think mob boss and assume he's uneducated and crude, all violence and no refinement. But his father insisted he study, learn languages, appreciate art, and understand the world beyond their neighborhood. I asked why, if he was just going to run a criminal organization. Because his father believed they could be more than criminals, that they could be patrons, benefactors, people who contributed to society while also operating outside its rules. He swirled his wine. He died when I was 25, in a car accident. An actual accident, not a hit. I inherited everything, including his vision of what we could be. I asked if he'd achieved it, his vision. He said he was trying. The scholarships, the charitable work, the legitimate businesses they run, that was all in service of his dream. But he was still his father's son, still running the operations he built, still making choices he might not have approved of. He looked at me directly. Still very much a criminal, no matter how I try to dress it up. But you're also a father, I said. A philanthropist. A man who reads Dante for pleasure and can discuss Caravaggio's technique. I reached across the table for his hand. You're complicated, Alessandro. That doesn't make you irredeemable. He said I make him want to be redeemable, to be worthy of how I look at him. He kissed my knuckles. Thank you for giving me a chance, for seeing past the reputation to the man underneath. I thanked him for being honest about who he is, for not pretending to be something he's not. We left the restaurant around 11, and I noticed the security immediately. 2 SUVs, one ahead and one behind Alessandro's car. He saw my expression and squeezed my hand. I told you, he said, being with me means protection. You'll get used to it. Will I? Will I ever get used to armed guards following me around? He said he hoped not completely. He hoped I would always stay a little uncomfortable with his world. That's what keeps you grounded. What keeps me grounded? He pulled me closer in the back seat. But I'll do everything in my power to make you feel safe. When we reached my apartment, he walked me to the door, despite my protests. He asked what kind of man lets his girlfriend walk into her building alone at night. He kissed me at my door, slow and deep, and I felt it all the way to my toes. He said he'd see me on Tuesday, that we had a regular schedule to remember. How could I forget? Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and now hopefully many dinners and weekends in between. He kissed me again and wished me a good night. I watched him return to his car, the SUVs pulling away in perfect formation, and I realized my life had fundamentally changed. I was dating a mob boss. Actually, officially dating him. Rachel was going to die when I told her. Inside my apartment, I found a gift on my kitchen counter. It was a set of professional-grade oil paints with a note in Alessandro's handwriting. It said, "For the studio, start painting again." I called him immediately and accused him of breaking into my apartment. He said he had someone deliver supplies, that there's a difference. I could hear the smile in his voice. He asked if I liked them. I told him they were perfect, but that he can't just what? He asked. Give gifts to my girlfriend? Make sure she has what she needs to pursue her passion? He paused. Get used to being spoiled, Sophia. It's one of the few pleasures I have, taking care of people I love. After we hung up, I stood in my tiny kitchen holding expensive art supplies, and I realized I was smiling like an idiot. This was insane, dangerous, probably a terrible idea, but I'd never been happier. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of contradictions. By day, I was Luca's tutor, watching him blossom as his Italian fluency grew and his confidence returned. By evening, I was Alessandro's girlfriend, learning to navigate a world where armed security was normal, and dinner conversations casually mentioned business disputes that I knew meant something far less innocent. I painted in Gianna's studio on the days I wasn't tutoring, and slowly the walls filled with canvases. They were abstract pieces, inspired by the complexity of my new life, all light and shadow, beauty and danger intertwined. One afternoon, Alessandro stood studying my latest piece and told me they were extraordinary. He said I should show them, have a gallery exhibition. I told him no one wants to see paintings by a mob boss's girlfriend. He corrected me. Everyone wants to see paintings by a talented artist, which you are. He pulled me into his arms, and being my girlfriend is just one part of who you are. Don't let my world define you completely. But it was hard not to let his world consume me. I learned the names of his key associates. Marco, his head of security. Vincent, his second in command. Paolo, his lawyer, who somehow kept everything legal despite the illegal activities funding it all. I learned which restaurants were family-owned, which neighborhoods were under their protection, and which politicians took their money and looked the other way. One night at a family dinner, Vincent observed that I was learning quickly. Apparently, I was important enough to be included in those now. He said most outsiders take years to understand their world, but I picked it up in months. Alessandro said proudly, with his hand resting on my thigh under the table, that I was smart, and that I asked good questions instead of pretending to understand. Vincent's wife, Maria, said with a knowing smile, smart enough to know she should run, but too in love to do it. I remember that feeling. I was in love, hopelessly, completely in love with a man who'd shown me sides of himself that contradicted everything I should have felt. He was ruthless in business, but gentle with his son. He was feared on the streets, but read poetry in Italian. He was a criminal by any legal definition, but had more honor than many legitimate businessmen I'd known. One night, lying in his bed, I told him I loved him. I'd started staying over several nights a week, as Luca had fully accepted my presence in their lives. I told him I knew it was complicated, and probably insane, but I loved him. He pulled me closer. Probably insane, definitely insane, but I love you too. More than I thought I could love anyone again after Gianna. You brought light back into my life, Sophia. You and Luca are my entire world now. I told him that was a lot of pressure. He said it was the truth. He kissed my forehead. Then he told me he needed to tell me something about why he'd been so protective lately. I propped myself up on my elbow and asked what was wrong. He said there's been a territorial dispute. Another family was moving in on their operations, trying to take advantage of what they perceived as weakness. His expression was grim. They're wrong, but they're also dangerous, and they've been asking questions about you. My blood ran cold. I asked what kind of questions. He said they were asking who I was, what I meant to him, and whether I'd be useful as leverage. He pulled me back down against him. He'd increased security on me and Luca. I probably hadn't noticed because his men were good at being invisible, but I was being protected 24 hours a day now. I suggested that maybe I should stay away for a while, if being with me put Luca at risk. He said no, absolutely not. First, leaving now would signal weakness, which would make everything worse. Second, I was safest when I was with him, in this house, surrounded by his security. And third, he cupped my face. I can't lose you. I won't lose another person I love. So you stay. We stay vigilant, and we trust that my family is strong enough to handle this threat. I asked how long it would last. He said it was hard to say. It could be resolved in days, or it could take months. These things have their own timeline. He kissed me softly. But I promise you, I'll keep you safe. Both of you. The threat became real 2 weeks later. I was walking to the townhouse from the subway, something I'd insisted on maintaining despite Alessandro's protests, when a car pulled up beside me. It wasn't one of our security SUVs. It was something else. A man leaned out the window, his smile not reaching his cold eyes, and said my name. I asked if I could help him, and kept walking, my hand moving to the phone in my pocket, ready to hit the emergency button Alessandro had programmed. The man said he just wanted to say hello, to let me know they've been watching me. He said I was very pretty, very vulnerable. Before I could respond, 2 of Alessandro's men materialized from nowhere, positioning themselves between me and the car. The man's smile faded, and the car sped away. Marco was suddenly there, his hand on my elbow, guiding me quickly toward one of our SUVs that had appeared. I asked what just happened. He said it was a message. They were testing our response time, making sure I knew they were watching. He helped me into the vehicle and said the boss was going to be furious they let them get that close. Alessandro was indeed furious. I'd never seen him so angry, pacing his study, speaking rapid Italian into his phone, his voice ice-cold with rage. When he finally hung up, he pulled me into his arms so tightly I could barely breathe. He was so sorry. He said they should never have gotten that close to me. I told him I was fine, that his men were there in seconds. Seconds too late, he said. They spoke to you, threatened you, made you feel unsafe. He pulled back to look at me, and I saw fear beneath the anger. This is my fault. I should have insisted you take the car this morning. Should have. Should have what? I asked. Locked me in this house? I'm not a prisoner, Alessandro. I'm your girlfriend. I can't live in fear. He told me I should be afraid, that these men were dangerous. I told him I trusted him to keep me safe, which he did. His security worked exactly as it should. I cupped his face. Don't let them win by making me give up my independence. That's exactly what they want. He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. You're right, but I'm increasing security anyway, and you're moving in here temporarily, until this is resolved. Alessandro. I started to protest. Non-negotiable, he said. His tone left no room for argument. I can't protect you properly if you're across the city, and I can't sleep knowing you're vulnerable. Please, Sophia, do this for me. For my sanity. I moved in that weekend, bringing clothes and art supplies, and setting up in the guest room despite Alessandro's protests that I should share his. I insisted that Luca didn't need to know we were sleeping together. He's 5. He doesn't need that confusion. Alessandro said Luca adores me, that he'd be thrilled if I were here permanently. I told him permanently is a big word. Is it? He asked. He backed me against the guest room wall, his body pressed against mine. Because I'm thinking very permanently about you. Thinking about forever. I reminded him we'd only been together for 3 months. I knew after 3 days, he said. The rest has just been confirming what my heart already knew. He kissed me deeply. But I'll be patient. I'll wait until you're ready for that conversation. Living in the townhouse was easier than I expected. Luca was thrilled to have me there constantly. Teresa welcomed my help in the kitchen, and even the security team became familiar, friendly faces. I painted in Gianna's studio, tutored Luca, and had dinner with Alessandro every night, like we were a normal family. Except we weren't normal. The threat hung over us constantly. Increased security. Restricted movements. Alessandro coming home late from meetings that I knew involved violence I didn't want details about. One night, he came home with bruised knuckles and blood on his shirt. Not his own, he assured me. But that didn't make it better. I cleaned his hands in our bathroom, neither of us speaking, both of us acknowledging what his world really meant. He said quietly he was sorry I had to see this side of him. I told him it was better to see all of him than just the parts he thinks I can handle. I bandaged his knuckles carefully. I asked if he'd killed anyone tonight. No, he said, but I hurt someone badly. Someone who needed to understand that threatening you was a mistake. His dark eyes met mine. I'm not proud of the violence, Sophia, but I won't apologize for protecting what's mine. I told him I wasn't asking him to apologize. I was just acknowledging the reality of loving him, which includes accepting that he does terrible things for what he believes are good reasons. He asked if I could live with that. Really live with it long term. I thought about the past 3 months. The happiness I'd found with him and Luca. The art I'd created. The life I'd built. The love that had grown despite the danger and moral complexity. Yes, I said. I can live with it. Because the man who comes home to me, who reads bedtime stories and discusses Dante, that man is worth the complicated parts. He pulled me into his arms, holding me like I was something precious. I don't deserve you, he said. I told him probably not, but he was stuck with me anyway. The territorial dispute resolved violently 2 weeks later. I didn't get details. Alessandro deliberately kept me from knowing specifics, but I understood from his exhaustion and relief that the threat was eliminated. The other family had backed down, or been forced out. Either way, we were safe again. He told me it was over, coming home at dawn after being gone all night. Completely over. You can move back to your apartment if you want. Return to your normal life. I looked around the townhouse that had become home. Luca's toys were scattered in the living room. My paintings were drying in Gianna's studio, and Alessandro was standing exhausted in the doorway, waiting for my answer. What if I don't want to move back? What if I want to stay here, with you and Luca? His expression transformed from exhausted to hopeful. You want to move in permanently? I told him I was already here. My stuff is here. Luca expects me at breakfast. Teresa has started asking my opinion on dinner menus. I moved to him, wrapping my arms around his neck. I want to stay, Alessandro. Not because of threats or protection, because this feels like home. He kissed me deeply, then pulled back with tears in his eyes. It was the first time I'd ever seen him cry. He said he was marrying me. I told him that wasn't a proposal. It was a statement of fact. He smiled through his tears. I'm going to marry you, Sophia Blake. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but someday, when you're ready, I'm going to make you my wife. That's very presumptuous, I said. That's very certain. he replied. You're mine. You've been mine since the moment you spoke Italian to my son in Central Park. I'm just waiting for you to realize it. 6 months later, he proposed properly in Gianna's studio, surrounded by my paintings, with Luca hiding behind the door holding a ring box. Alessandro knelt, and I felt my breath catch. He said I brought light back into their darkness. I gave Luca his voice and him his heart. I've accepted his world, loved him despite his flaws, and made this house a home again. He asked me to marry him. Luca rushed out holding the box, pleading for me to marry them. I looked at the two of them, the dangerous mob boss and the sweet 5-year-old, the family I'd never expected to find. And I knew my answer. Yes, I'll marry you. Both of you. Alessandro slipped the ring on my finger while Luca cheered, and I realized my life had gone from ordinary to extraordinary the moment I'd chosen to help a lost child who spoke Italian. Alessandro whispered that he loved me. I told him I loved him too. We married 3 months later in a small ceremony, family only, which in Alessandro's world meant about 100 people. I wore a simple white dress, carried flowers from the townhouse garden, and spoke my vows in Italian, which made Luca cry happy tears. During his vows, Alessandro said I'd given him everything: love, family, and hope for the future. He promised to protect me, cherish me, and love me for all his days. He said I was his life. Our wedding night, he made love to me like I was something sacred, and I felt the weight of what we'd built together. A life balanced between his dark world and our bright love, complicated and beautiful, and uniquely ours. A year after our wedding, I stood in Gianna's studio, my studio now, looking at the invitation for my first gallery exhibition. It was for 20 paintings exploring the intersection of danger and beauty, darkness and light, and the complicated nature of loving someone impossible. Alessandro said from the doorway, with Luca on his hip, that they were going to love it. I said they were going to ask questions about my inspiration, about my life. He said I'll answer honestly, that I found love in unexpected places, that sometimes the most dangerous choice is also the right one. He kissed me softly. That you spoke Italian to a lost child and ended up finding a family. I told him it was the best decision I ever made. He corrected me. Second best. The best was saying yes when I proposed. I laughed, pulling both of them close. And I knew he was right. Speaking Italian had brought me to them. But choosing to stay, choosing to love them despite everything, that had been the real decision. And I'd make it again, every single time.